Hi everyone, and welcome to this week's Crime and Punishment story. This week I am covering the tragic story of John William Hoy and the murder of Anne Hoy, which took place in Jarrow in 1898. I hope you will find it interesting, and I just want to add that I am full of cold at the moment, so I am trying not to sniff too much during the recording, so I do apologise for that in advance just in case I do. But before we begin, can I just say, if you do enjoy this video, then please give it a thumbs up, and if you are new here or haven't already done so, then do please consider subscribing to the channel to help support the content we create. Thank you. It is completely free to subscribe. It doesn't cost you any money, but it really does help to support the channel. And I would just like to add, as I always do now, that I do record these stories live, so I do sometimes make mistakes, which I always try to rectify, so I hope this does not spoil your enjoyment of the video. The past lives of those involved in this week's story really is next to nothing, so the information about their backstory will be incredibly basic. John William Hoy, who was more commonly known as William, was said to be around 27 years old at the time the crime was committed, so would have been born in around 1871. His place of birth is unknown, but it is likely to have been in Jarrow. His father's name is unknown, but his mother was called Anne, and Anne is the victim of this story. Anne was said in the papers at the time of her death to have been around 74 years old. However, her death details suggest she was only 69. Unfortunately, dates from the newspapers are often incorrect, as are ages. Anne, who was a widow, lived in Jarrow with her sons William and Joseph, and William was working as a labourer. Anne was a known drinker and was said to have often caused trouble for her sons with her behaviour when she was drunk. On Sunday night, November the 20th, 1898, Joseph Hoy returned to the home he shared in Jarrow with his mother and brother William, and on entering the kitchen he found his mother Anne lying on the floor. She appeared to have been attacked and was bleeding, and Joseph was not sure if she was alive or dead, so he quickly went to find a doctor. Dr. Norman of Jarrow arrived a short time later, and on examining Anne, he told Joseph that his mother was dead and had been so for quite some time. Sergeant Atkinson was sent for, and he examined the house and found many bloodstains around the room and signs of a disturbance. And acting on information received, he then went in search of William Hoy, who he found on November the 21st at around 1 a.m, and he arrested him for the willful murder of his mother, Anne Hoy. The inquest was held at the police station in Jarrow on November the 21st before Coroner Shepherd. Joseph Hoy said he had identified the body as being that of his mother Anne, who he lived with in Jarrow. He said he had seen his mother on a Saturday night around 6:30 p.m. She had been in good health. She was sitting on a chair in the kitchen. His brother William had also been in the house with his mother at the time, but he said he did not speak to him. He believed that both his mother and brother had been drinking, but neither seemed to be the worse for drink. He said he had gone out after this and returned around 11 p.m, and his mother was still sitting on a chair. He said again she was in good health, although he did say she had her head in her hands, but he said he did not think that she seemed to be ill. He said he asked her for a pawn ticket that belonged to him, and she told him where to find it, and he again left the house, not returning until 8:30 p.m. the following night, and it was then that he had found his mother lying on the kitchen floor. He said both her eyes were black and her face had been bleeding. He said he thought she was dead, but he was not sure, and he had gone to find his sister to ask her to come to the house, and he also went to find a doctor. He said William was not in the house when he had returned at 8:30 p.m, and he did not know where he was. He added that he himself had only returned to the house to check on his mother, not intending to stop there, as he had been looking for lodgings elsewhere, because, he said, his mother's drinking had got bad again, and he did not want to live with her any more. Mary Ash of Jarrow said that Anne Hoy was her mother. She said she had last seen her alive around 6 months ago. She said she had not been on friendly terms with most of her family and did not really speak to them. She said Joseph had come to her house on the Sunday night and told her that he thought their mother was dead, and he had told her that he was going to find a doctor. She said she then went to her mother's house in Jarrow with a neighbour, and they found Anne lying on the kitchen floor. She said there was blood on her face and hands, but not on her clothes. She did not touch her mother until Dr. Norman arrived and had told her that she was dead. After the doctor had left, she said she had removed some items from the house, and she did not realise they were blood-stained until later, and they had been given to the police. Sergeant Atkinson then showed the jury the skirt and petticoat that Mary had taken from the house, and Mary identified them as belonging to her mother. She said after she returned to her own home, her brother William had come to see her. She had told him their mother was dead, and he did not say anything. She said she had not seen him for 3 months before that night. She said she had not been back to her mother's house after this, and the police had the keys. She said her daughter Jane still visited her mother and was on friendly terms with her. Jane Ash of Jarrow said that Anne Hoy was her grandmother. She said she had visited her on the Sunday the 20th, and she seemed well to her. Anne had asked her to go for some whiskey, but she had said she had to ask her own mother if she could get some, and her mother would not let her go, so she did not go back to the house. She said while she had been there, only Anne had been at home, and she had not seen William or Joseph. Mary Alger said she also lived in Ferry Street in Jarrow in the rooms above the Hoys. She said at around 7:30 p.m. on Saturday night she heard Anne cry out, "Oh Billy, don't, you're killing me." She said she then heard sounds of Anne and her son arguing. However, she said she did not take much notice of this as it was something that happened often. She heard Anne shrieking and yelling and the sounds as if someone had fallen, and the noises went on for around half an hour. She said she had gone out after this and returned around 10 p.m, and it was then that she saw Anne standing at her back door, and she had called her over, and Mary said she had gone into her kitchen. Anne had 2 black eyes, and her face was bleeding, and her clothes were covered in blood. At this, Mary identified the skirt which had been shown to the jury earlier as being the skirt that Anne had been wearing that night. She did not mention that if she had asked if Anne wanted a doctor, and she seems to have left the house fairly quickly. She said William was not in when she had gone into Anne's house, but she saw him on his way out on the Sunday night at around 7 p.m. He had spoken to her saying, "It's a fine night," and she said she had agreed with him that it was. Around an hour later, she said Joseph had called her into the house, and she had seen Anne lying on the floor. She said the room was in disarray, and the back of a chair had been broken off and was lying on the table. When asked, she said she had seen Anne with black eyes on other occasions, usually when she was drunk. And when William asked her about the chair, she said she had not noticed that it had been broken earlier. Charles Alger said he also lived in Ferry Street in Jarrow. He said he had been in the backyard around 7:30 when he had heard angry voices coming from the kitchen of the Hoy's house. He said he heard the sound of heavy blows and then heard Anne say, "Don't, William, I am dying." He said after this he heard William swear at his mother and tell her, "I'll do for you." He said he heard more noises coming from the house at around 11:30 p.m, but he did not know if William was at home at the time. He said he last saw Anne at around 8 or 9 a.m. the following Sunday morning. However, he did not say if she had black eyes at the time. Patrick Mullen of Jarrow said he had been to visit Anne Hoy at around 4 p.m. on the Saturday afternoon. He said she was in the kitchen at the time and had 2 black eyes and her face was bleeding. Her clothes were also covered in blood. He asked her if she wanted a policeman, and he then went to look for one, but not being able to find one, he returned and told one of the neighbours what he had seen. However, he did not say which neighbour he had spoken to. He said when he had seen Anne, he believed that she had been sober. Annie Carlyle said she also lived in Ferry Street in Jarrow. She said on the Saturday she had spoken to Anne at her own door. She said Anne had come to her to lend some money from her. She had told her to come back later. She said her face was bleeding, but she did not notice if her eyes were black. Later that night, she said she had seen William in Ormond Street. She had spoken to him, telling him to go home, and she had also said that she told him that he had been ill-using his mother. She said her husband had come over to her then and told her that it was nothing to do with her, and William had quickly walked away from her. She said she did not see him again until the Sunday night when he had been at the house after the doctor and the police had left. She said he had been leaning on a desk in the room and his mother had been lying at his feet, and he had left soon after this. Dr. Norman said he had been called to the house at around 8:40 p.m. and had found Anne Hoy lying on the kitchen floor. She was already dead, and he believed that she had been dead for several hours. He said her face was bleeding and her eyes and lips were swollen and discoloured. There was also some damage to one of her ears and she had a wound on her head. Her hands were covered with blood. He said with the assistance of Dr. McMurtry, he had performed the post-mortem on the body of Anne Hoy. He said she had a fracture to her nose and there was bleeding in her brain. He said she had many other injuries, all of which were consistent with fall or blows to the body. The only thing in favour of blows causing her death was that she did not have any cuts, which he would have expected if she had fallen. He said it was his professional opinion and also that of Dr. McMurtry that death had been due to the fracture to her nose and the blood loss caused by this. Dr. McMurtry also gave evidence which was very similar to that of Dr. Norman. He also stated that the injuries to the body of Anne Hoy could have been caused by blows or falls, and some of which could have been caused by falling on something blunt and round. Sergeant Atkinson said he had been called to the house on Sunday night and had arrived at around 9:40 p.m. He found Joseph Hoy and Mary Ash in the house, and the body of Anne Hoy was lying on the floor in the kitchen. The doctor had already been, and he felt that Anne's face had been washed since the doctor had left, although no one said they had done this. He said he found evidence of blood all round the room and on items such as a towel on the floor in the front room. He said he had been told that William had ill-used his mother, so he'd gone to look for him. He said he had found him around 1 a.m. the following morning, and when he arrested him on the charge of wilful murder, William had replied saying, "It is a bad job. We have had lots of trouble with her. She is always drunk." He said he did not make any further statements after this. The coroner then spoke to the jury, stating it was clear to see that Anne's death had been caused by violence of some kind, but no one had seen the attack take place. However, he felt the evidence was enough for them to find William guilty of the crime, and that it should be a verdict of murder. The jury very quickly returned a verdict of wilful murder against William Hoy, and he was committed for trial. I did not find any evidence of a funeral for Anne Hoy. It is not clear if the family had money, although they did not sound as if they were well off, so this may have been a case of a pauper's funeral. I did not find any evidence of a headstone anywhere in the area for Anne Hoy. Prior to the trial taking place, the grand jury would always view the case, and it was always their decision if the coroner's verdict would be tried in court, and in this case they rejected the case of wilful murder. However, William was not free to go. He was still held on the coroner's verdict of wilful murder and would still stand trial on this, which was unusual, as in most cases when the grand jury threw out the bill, those accused were usually discharged. The trial took place at Durham before Mr. Justice Lawrence. At the opening of the trial, Mr. Miller for the defence said he wished to withdraw the plea of not guilty to wilful murder and replace it with one of guilty of manslaughter. The judge said he felt this was the correct course to take, and the prosecution also spoke of his agreement. The defence then went on to say that he must remind them that the grand jury had not sent down a case for manslaughter. However, as he felt it was possible that William had in some way been responsible for the violence that caused his mother's death, he had advised him to plead guilty. The judge then stated that before passing sentence he wished to consult with the grand jury and hear their reasons for rejecting the murder charge and also their reasons for not sending down a bill for manslaughter, and this was agreed upon by the defence and the prosecution. The sentence hearing was held a few days later, and the judge said he had spoken to the grand jury and they had said they had thrown out the case as the doctor's evidence had not been conclusive that Anne's death had been caused by violence, and it was their feeling that it may have been caused by her being drunk and falling. At this, William was then discharged on what today we would call a suspended sentence, which cost him £5 as a surety of his good behaviour from then on. I did not find any further evidence of William getting into trouble with the police, and although it was difficult to find out for sure, it is possible that he would later go on to marry and have children of his own, moving to South Shields and working as an engine driver. And if this is the case, then it's safe to say that he had had a very lucky escape and that he had managed to turn his life around for the better. This was a very odd case. I found some of the evidence quite conflicting. Both Joseph Hoy and Jane Ash spoke of seeing Anne on the Saturday and the Sunday, but neither of them said that she had black eyes or any other injuries. Yet the neighbours spoke of seeing her injured and bleeding badly on the Saturday. So it does in some way sound like the family were, for some reason, covering up the fact that Anne had been injured from at least the Saturday afternoon. And William was heard to argue and fight with his mother on the Saturday night, and she was heard to cry out that he was killing her, yet no one went to check to see if she was okay. But, as was often the case when families were known to frequently fight, especially due to drunken behaviour, then the neighbours would often refuse to get involved. So was William in some way involved with the death of his mother? Well, I certainly don't think he was entirely innocent. It's clear that he had at the very least hit her on the Saturday, but had he done the final damage? Well, that is hard to say, as it may have been a case that Anne then went on to get drunk and fell, hitting her face on something on the floor or a chair on the way down. And this would make the doctor's evidence more realistic in the fact that the injuries could have been caused by blows or by falls. However, it has to be noted that many cases would be tried for murder where the doctor had stated the injuries may have been caused by falls, but perhaps other cases had more evidence to support violence from another person than this one had. Was the judge correct to discharge William without sending him to prison? Well, it seems he did not have much choice. The grand jury had said the evidence was not there for murder or manslaughter, and although William had pleaded guilty, it would have been wrong for him to send him to prison, so it seems that discharge was the only option. But I personally do think that he had a hand in his mother's death and should have spent some time in prison for this. But what do you think? Do you think William caused his mother's death by hitting her with the alleged broken chair? Or do you think that she fell when she was drunk and caused the damage herself? Do you think the doctor's evidence was enough to find in favour of murder? And do you think the sentence that William received was the correct one? Or should he have been sent to prison simply for ill-using his mother? Do please let me know your thoughts in the comments below. I do hope that you have found this sad and tragic story interesting. And I am terribly sorry that I had to cough there. And I do thank you all very much for watching. And I do hope to see you all again very soon. I really wasn't going to go back to the start when I'd reached the end. Sorry about that. Anyway, thank you for watching.